The court was so quiet, it became unnatural. Even the air itself paused, waiting as if it, too, expected what was to come. Gallery attendees leaned forward in their seats, not out of necessity, but because they couldn't help it. Their chests thumped with expectation of something they knew was imminent, something that would shatter the tenuous calm like glass breaking against rock. At the defense table sat Kody Brown. Not long ago, he had been the proud and vulnerable head of a vast family empire. Cameras trailed behind him, tabloids emblazoned his name in bold print, and TLC constructed a show around his concept of family and love. But here, beneath the cold lights of the courtroom, there were no producers, no cuts, no flattering lighting. There was merely Kody, smaller, softer, grayer. He was nothing at all like that sure-footed man whom fans recalled from their televisions. His shoulders slumped a little, his eyes scoured the room, and the edges of his mouth curled downward. Not in annoyance, but with discomfort. For years Kody had been the most vocal presence in a room. He had defended himself on camera, in interviews, even in quiet arguments. He had always had a word, an explanation, an excuse, a means of turning the tale back onto himself. But today was not like that. Today he wasn't holding the mic. Today he wasn't dictating the narrative. The judge, a strict man in a black gown, looked down at the documents in front of him, then slowly, intently, raised his head. His voice sliced through the quiet, like a knife through the night. "Will the next witness come forward?" The words rung through against the wooden surfaces of the courtroom walls. For an instant no one stirred. The creak of a chair, the fidgeting of nervous feet, and the soft hum of the fluorescent lights created the void. The crowd appeared to be holding its breath. Kody narrowed his eyes, a flash of annoyance crossing his face. He'd anticipated another wife, someone like Christine or Janelle, waiting to come in and give her testimony against him with tales of neglect and favoritism. He'd prepared for that. He'd arguments waiting, etched in the solitude of his own mind. He was preparing himself for battle with familiar foes. But what transpired next tore through his barriers like lightning through the night air. From the second row, a figure slowly got to his feet. The squeak of the chair on the highly polished floor was thunderous in the silence. Heads turned in his direction. Murmurs swelled through the gallery like a wave. The figure didn't slow down. Step by step, he started making his way down the aisle to the stand. It wasn't a wife. It wasn't an ex-wife. It wasn't Robin, who sat rigidly in the back, holding onto her purse as if it were her lifeline. No. This was someone Kody never saw coming. Someone he couldn't debate out of existence. It was his own son. Gasps erupted from all sides of the courtroom. The atmosphere changed. People spoke quietly to one another, their hands over their mouths in shock. Reporters wrote frantically in notebooks, knowing the moment for what it was. History, it was something else for Kody. The treachery was intolerable. This wasn't Christine, whose fury he had brushed aside as bitterness. This wasn't Janelle, whose autonomy he had attributed to rebellion. This wasn't Mary, whose alienation he had handled as her responsibility. This was blood. This was his own flesh and blood. This was his son. Kody's face went white. The color sucked from his cheeks. His eyes went wide with shock, then narrowed in a combination of anger and fear. His mouth opened and closed, but his words stuck in his throat. He reclined back in his chair, as if he'd been physically assaulted. His knuckles went white as he clenched the edge of the defense table. The son, tall, broad-shouldered but with a slumped posture heavy from years of weight, strided purposefully toward the witness stand. His face was inscrutable, but his eyes smoldered with something that bit deeper than rage. It was sadness. Each step rang louder than the previous one. Each step, with every step, Kody's universe contracted smaller and smaller, the walls closing. He attempted to swallow, but his throat was parched. The rear cameras snapped and flashed. The pens of the reporters moved quicker. The gallery hunched in closer, not wanting to miss a single word. Kody moved in his seat once more, his hand drifting to his mouth as though to conceal the shake of his lips. His other hand drummed against the tabletop, a wild beat that he couldn't stifle. His son approached the stand, hesitated and glanced fleetingly at the judge. The bailiff moved forward, extending the Bible, and the son put his hand on it. His voice, while soft, commanded enough respect to freeze the room in absolute silence. "I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth." The judge nodded, pointing toward the chair. The son spun around, finally standing before his father. Their eyes met. For what felt like an eternity, it was only the two of them. Father and son. Blood tied together, but parted by years of distance, disappointment, and wounds that refused to heal. Kody's chest moved with rapid, shallow breaths. His son's jaw grew tight, but his eyes never left his. The air was thick with tension. A woman in the gallery wiped her eyes with a tissue. Another held the hand of the person next to her. Even the judge, who had probably heard thousands of cases in his career, leaned back a little from the table, sensing the seriousness of what was happening. The quiet wasn't hollow. It was heavy. It vibrated with all the things that hadn't been said, with the burden of generations past, with the anguish of years condensed into this one instant. And then, the son spoke. "Dad." The single word weighed so heavily that a collective shiver coursed through the room. It wasn't merely an address. Rather, an accusation, a supplication, and a confrontation all rolled into one syllable. Kody blinked rapidly, lips compressing into a thin line. Uncomfortable shoulders shifted. For once in his life, Kody Brown was at a loss for words. The son leaned forward, voice cracking but firm. "You weren't there for us." The words hit like a hammer. The audience gasped. A quiet sob escaped someone in the back. Kody stiffened, each muscle tensing in his body. He flinched, his eyes flicking toward the gallery, desperate for an exit. There wasn't any. The son went on, his speech slow and labored, each word a knife that pierced deeper into Kody's well-crafted persona. "Not when we needed you most. Not when the cameras had left. Not when the lights went out. You weren't present, Dad." Kody's breath choked in his throat. His face turned red, then white again. He had his mouth open, but the judge cut him off. "Mr. Brown, you will be silent until it is your time." The gavel came down once, harsh and conclusive. And thus Kody sat there, stuck, asked to listen, asked to hear the words he had been avoiding for so long. The gallery fell silent once more, but it was no longer the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of revelation. Silence that occurs when the truth first starts to rip through deceit like fire tearing at paper. And at that instant, every person in that courtroom was aware of one thing with absolute certainty. This was not another testimony. This was not another page in a long, bitter family history. This was the start of Kody Brown's reckoning. The room had already changed. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was oppressive. A blanket weighing upon every chest. Following the shock of witnessing Kody's son stand, the gallery held its collective breath in anticipatory tension. The boy was not a boy anymore. He was a man, but one bearing scars etched deep from childhood. He sat on the stand, hands slightly shaking as he fiddled with the microphone. His eyes, wet and shiny, never strayed from his father. He didn't say a word for a long time. He simply sat, shallowly breathing, his chest going up and down as if fighting something intangible within himself. The gallery observed, their eyes fixed on him. Even the reporters, whose pens had haphazardly scratched just minutes earlier, now hung suspended in mid-air. And then, in a voice that cracked beneath the burden of years, he spoke at last. "Dad." It wasn't loud. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't even consistent. But it echoed across the room like a sledge against metal. Kody winced, his eyes narrowing, his lips compressing. That single word alone was enough to pull him into the past. The many times he had heard it, but refused the sentiment behind it. The son gulped hard. His second attempt at speech still broke, but was firmer. "You weren't there for us." The words cut through the quiet. No lawyerly argument, no rehearsal defense, no editing caution could mellow them. They hit hard, unadorned and agonized. Gasps echoed through the gallery. A woman in the rear covered her chest with her hand. Another dabbed at tears she hadn't even known had fallen. Even the judge shifted forward, his face set in tighter lines, not in judgment, but in acknowledgement of the seriousness of what was being spoken. The son's voice trembled as he attempted to go on. His throat closed, but he struggled past. Not when we needed you the most. The judge cleared his throat, ready to say something, when a voice pierced the air. Your Honor? Christine Brown's voice echoed from the gallery. Gasps filled the room. It wasn't usual for onlookers to make comments, but the judge, aware of the moment, gave her a gentle nod. Slowly Christine stood up, her face white but resolute. She walked over to Kody, her voice firm but gentle. He's correct, you see. All these years, we pleaded with you to be here. Not your domination, not your rule, your presence. We pleaded that you loved us like we were important. And all we received was a man seeking dominance, rather than bonding. Next to her, Janelle put a hand on Christine's shoulder before standing herself. The children paid the price for your pride. Kody, not only this son, all of them. And deep down, I believe you know it. Mary sat still, her face inscrutable, but the unspoken tears streaming down her face spoke volumes. She couldn't. And then, all eyes turned to Robin. She shuddered standing, her voice faltering. I stood up for you. I made excuses for you. I fought your wars for years. But even I can't pretend anymore. You lost them, you lost us, and nobody else is to blame but you. The courtroom hummed with shocked whispers. For the first time, the four women stood together, united, but not as wives, as witnesses. The judge's reflection. The judge leaned forward, hands clasped. His tone was soft, but weighted with finality. Mr. Brown, what you heard today is not of legal punishment. It is something much larger. It is a witness of the human heart. They are not here looking for prison walls or fees. They are here looking for acknowledgement. They are here looking for what you denied them for so long. Truth. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. And the truth is this. A man may head a household by name, but leadership without love is merely control. And control falls apart the moment the heart gets a word in edgewise. The gavel fell once, ringing out in the hall. This court cannot pass judgment upon your soul, Mr. Brown. That is for you, and you only to deal with. Kody's collapse, all eyes back on Kody. His face was white, his lips quivering, his body shaking under the burden of everything that had just transpired. For a man who founded his life on being invincible, the shame was too much to bear. He parted his lips, his voice cracking. I didn't mean. But the words hung there. The excuses wouldn't flow, the defenses wouldn't build. For the first time, he had no armor. Tears filled his eyes. He lowered his head, cupping his hands around his face. And in that instant, the courtroom saw not the dominant patriarch, not the television icon, not the head of a polygamous kingdom. They saw a man stripped bare of all illusions, a father shattered by the reality of his own children. The walk away. The judge dismissed the witness. The trial, at least the legal trial, was finished. But the true verdict had already been handed down. The son rose, his shoulders weighed down but his feet firm. He glanced at his siblings, and they stood to follow him. They moved together toward the door, not with victory, but with freedom. Christine and Janelle trailed after, their heads held high, their children in tow. Even Mary exited, her silence stronger than any words. Robin hung back for an instant, her gaze on Kody. For so many years, she had been the one to stand by his side, to defend him, to shoulder the burden of his decisions. But now, even she turned and departed. Kody sat by himself at the table, by himself in a way he had never experienced before. The verdict that counted outside the courtroom. Reporters swarmed, microphones held high, cameras snapping, but the son did not speak. He had no need to. His testimony had already testified. And as the family walked past the uproar, there was an unsettling quiet tranquility in their gait. And for the first time in years, the truth was revealed. The lies were broken. The verdict was not typed on paper. It wasn't handed down by the crack of a gavel. It was handed down in the shattering voice of a son, in the tearful eyes of mothers, in the silence of a father who could no longer protect himself. And that verdict was final. The last image back in the house. Kody remained still. The crowd had dissipated. The cameras shut down. The voices stilled. The great patriarch of the Brown clan now sat alone in an otherwise vacant courtroom, his eyes fixed on the floor. The sound of his own breathing hung in the air, and for the first time the man who once had 4 wives, 18 children and an empire founded on his name, had nothing. Because the only verdict that ever really matters is the one written not by law, but by love. And Kody Brown had lost it. Forever.